Hello, everybody. Today is March 23rd, 2018, and we'll be discussing the Crowley case here on this live conference call with people both on the chat room and also on the telephone. Dan Hennon, this is Dan Hennon here. Greg Fernandez here is joining me as well, and then we'll go around and introduce the others on the call. Also, we're hoping for roughly about a 2-hour show tonight to get some things covered. One of such is there's really three things I think to cover tonight. Number one is this new spreadsheet called Inconsistencies. It's a Google Doc made that people can populate the inconsistencies in this crime so far. We'll go through that list, and then we'll have the two updates or announcements here that has been relatively new here in the last couple of days. One being such is the Ranny's ashes are en route and being overnighted down to the Alam family in Texas so they can have a proper burial. We'll have an update on that. And then also Sidra's friend, or actually Sidra has said that there's a possibility that we could get an interview or a conference call meeting with lead detective Jim Gummert on this case to go over some of these things and put some of this to bed, as this is over 3 years now. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, Dan. Thanks.
How are you doing tonight?
I am doing excellent.
Well, do you have any any questions or comments or anything to start off this broadcast before we dive into the inconsistency list?
No, I say we go for it. Let's rock and roll.
Perfect. Now, what we'll do is have those the callers and people in the chat room. If you're in the chat, you can just put in a request to say, "Hey, I've got a question or a comment or something," and then we'll get you on. And if you're a caller, we'll get you on as well. Please state your name and then also where you're from, what city or country you're from, and also if you're not on the call, please keep in mind to try to mute. Stay on mute until you're on the call to keep away the side noise. So I think the file is out there. So what we did is we created a file on Google Docs. It's really just it's an Excel file on Google where we can put in 5 columns of information. One is, and anyone can do this. This is free. You don't need to have a username, login, any kind of credentials here. Is put in the topic. Put in the person that made the statement or the comment, and then put in the actual facts that were said or stated that actually are true. And then we've got a column that says reason. You know, sometimes the reason are sometimes is simply misinformation, which is just something that has been messed up or screwed up or not necessarily not true. And then there's also disinformation, which is typically spread on purpose to try to get people distracted or sidetracked. So the first thing here, we'll have those can jump in here when we start, but we'll just go through the first 5 here probably. Number 1, the couch was pushed up against the front window. Now, neighbor Judy Prochnow made this comment in the People.com magazine article on the web in the comments section, telling everyone there that the dog was able to jump up and look out because the couch was pushed up against the front window. Once the crime scene photos came out, the couch and the sectional sofa was up against the wall, and not there's actually a bookshelf underneath the window. The second item is the quote, "There was no lights on in the home." This is also neighbor Judy Prochnow. We do know the dining room light was on. That's a light above the dining room table that holds 5 light bulbs, and only one was remaining lit when police officers came. So over the 3-week period, the other 4 bulbs had burnt out. But for that 3-week period, 24/7, that dining room light was on with the front curtains wide open. That should have been something noticed by all the neighbors right away, with a big picture window that big with a full chandelier light, dining room light on the entire time. And then to have Judy come in and say there's actually no lights on in that home. That is just ludicrous, actually. Next thing is item 3. The money raised for the GoFundMe campaign was used to, quote, fly the ashes to Texas for Comel's funeral. Mason Hendricks from the Gray State Project made this quote. Now, Comel wasn't cremated. Randy and David Crowley were cremated, but Comel's body remains were flown to Texas, where she had actually a proper funeral at a Muslim church. So Mason said to me, this was done on an instant message, private message to me personally. He said that they did use the money from the GoFundMe campaign, that $8,000, and used a portion of it to fly the ashes to Texas. And that GoFundMe campaign was set up to raise funds for Naila Alam and her medical treatment. That and that only. Even if it was a nice gesture to do that, to use the money to fly down someone's ashes or the body remains altogether, it still was not the purpose of that. So that we believe is disinformation to get us all sidetracked. The fourth item is a Christmas tree blocked the view of the bullet hole in the ceiling. Now remember that when officers had to come back a second time to notice that bullet hole in the ceiling, Mason Hendricks made the excuse to say that the officers didn't see it because the Christmas tree was blocking the view. And you can see from the image, the BCA image 4408 shows the clear distance between the Christmas tree and the ceiling. Not the case. And then the fifth one here, a kick lock was used for the rear slider. Now Sean Wright made this quote also for that rear slider. As we all know, evidence shows per the police audio, that rear slider was unlocked and slightly ajar. Police got to the scene, rounded up the dog, and quickly gained access to the home. Sean Wright said later that a kick lock was used, and that door was locked, and they had to get a locksmith in to unlock that front door to the home to gain access to the front door. And that is obvious disinformation also. All right, that's the first 5. Any interest, any comments so far? We'll check out the chat.
Anyone?
Anything from you, Louise?
Hi, I'm here. Yeah, you know, regarding the bullet hole in the ceiling, didn't someone post an interesting article yesterday about the police procedure and something about how they should look up? But
that's the best part.
You know the document I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. That PDF, it's like a 12-page PDF that's in the file section right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we should send that to them.
Maybe we should.
I mean, I don't want to be too hard on the cops, only because I do want Detective Gummert to come on here and join us one of these days. But I mean, come on, that's definitely going to be the first question that I would ask him.
Well, yeah, and
who looked up?
What can you say, really?
Yeah, and that was for the new people following the case. That was the alleged bullet that killed David Crowley himself, which is one could argue the most important bullet in this case was that one, which later found in the attic that bullet fragment with David Crowley's DNA on it. And so this was not a bullet hole found in a closet, in a back corner of a room, in some wall off to the side. This was when you come in that front door of that home, directly, literally above your head. And so where all this took place, it's really inconceivable that would ever have been missed, but evidently it was missed. So they had to come back a second time and find that, take the photos of the hole, and that was the third time. That was the third time the officers had to come back to the home, because the cleaning crew found a bullet fragment when they were there the following day or 2 days later. And so they had to come out and get the picture images of that bullet fragment underneath the carpeting. And this is not, carpeting nailed down onto the flooring. This was just the area sectional rug that they could have just simply lifted up and the bullet, fell loosely to the ground. So this was a month later. They found the bullet hole in the ceiling. So they had 3 trips to find the 5 bullet fragments in the house.
Yeah, and it should also be pointed out that it wasn't the cops that found them either time. So, yeah.
Correct.
They had to be told about it.
Yep, they found neither of. Yeah, correct. Cleaning crew called 911 or called police to, announce that they did discover that, and then Chris Klein, the infamous Chris Klein, talked to police in February of 2015 and said that the reason he was in the house is because they were in the attic looking for the bullet from the hole in the ceiling. And that's when the detective who was on the phone says, what hole? What holes in the ceiling? So they went out the very next day to discover that. So that is some interesting information. Now the kick lock.
Dan?
Yes, please go ahead.
Dan. Hi, this is Sophia.
Hi, Sophia.
I'm in Corpus, Texas.
Yes.
And I had studied the BCA lab reports. And the bullet that was found, I'm trying to find it on my attic bullet. No blood, no tissue. The only thing that was found on it was a male DNA profile that matches David Crowley, but that is touch DNA only.
Oh.
So, yeah.
So you're talking touch like from a finger holding it, picking it up?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Placing the round in that magazine? So it wasn't his DNA from his skull?
No.
Wow. I did not know
that. It was, the only thing that they got was a swab off the bullet. There was no blood. There was no tissue. Just only touch DNA.
No, that's very interesting.
And
here we are 3 years later and still no evidence to link David Crowley. Wow.
The DNA does not match Cannell or Rainey. It's only one profile that was found. So I wanted to jump in real quick.
Oh, very good.
Do you know what page that's on? In which document?
It's item 57-1. My pages had gotten all mixed up and it printed out.
Okay.
So
item 57.
I honestly,
I wonder if that's.
But
it is. That's in the 485 page. Mm-hmm.
It's from the BCA lab reports.
Okay, I'm going to pull that up.
And it's titled item 51-7. 51. Excuse me, I'm dyslexic. 57-1.
Okay. Yeah, that's a big deal.
And then they also, for the pistol, they tested several different items. They tested the grip, the side, the trigger, and the muzzle. They also tested the magazine. All of these had David's DNA on it, touch DNA. The magazine had David's blood on it. The major profiles do not match Cannell or Rainey on either of them, and they had a mixture of 2 or more individuals. Cannell was excluded from the gun.
That's important. That's really important.
And it did say that on the magazine, Cannell and Rainey could not be excluded, but they did say that it was David's major male DNA profile matches David Timothy Crowley. Major profile does not match Cannell or Rainey. So the blood that's on the clip is from David and not Cannell. So that little fingertip blood
Yeah.
that you see on the magazine and the pictures, that's David's blood.
Okay.
So
I'll look
But
for
I-
that.
thought that was important to add too, since we were talking about that bullet and all the misinformation that's been given out.
Yeah, so you're basically saying they can't put the gun. I mean, it's more proof they can't put the gun in David's hand.
No. And, you know, we have to ask ourselves, why was David bleeding? Obviously, there was a reason why he was bleeding.
Right, because it was his blood. I see what you're saying. Okay, interesting. I did
And-
one thing. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, just it's a little off topic, and I'm trying not to do that anymore. It's very hard. But speaking of when you talk about that blood, because the blood on the keyboard in the living room laptop or the kitchen laptop, that's David's blood, right? Or is that Kamel's blood? I forget.
No, it's Kamel.
Which one it is. Okay, so that's Kamel's blood.
The footprints,
Mhm.
the laptop, the bullets found the very first day
Mhm.
were all Kamel's. The blood on the iPhone was a mixture of two or more people. Kamel and Rania could not be excluded, possible contributors. David was excluded.
The blood on the iPhone, okay. On the iPhone found on David, or found on David.
That was the iPhone that was found on the island next to the
found
laptop.
on the island, right?
But
I was thinking that might have been in David's pocket or in somebody's pocket. It's really weird that that's out there like that, all bloody. But I don't know.
I'm trying to find the notepad. The handwriting on the notepad. Okay, that notepad was a mixture of two or more individuals. DNA profile indicated as female matches Kamel. Major profile does not match David or Rania. David and Rania can be excluded from being contributors. Even if they were on David's hands, don't you think that his DNA would have also been added into that, if his blood? Okay, if Kamel's blood was on his hands and he touched that notepad, skin cells, anything,
something
should have been in that blood that they swabbed. They would have picked up something, but a mixture of two or more individuals, David and Rania, were excluded from the handwriting. And, well, this is the notepad that had that blood that was on it, the one that said submit to Allah or Alan.
Oh, okay. Baffling.
And that's item 41-2 on that BCA lab report.
But the the fingerprint, Sophia, that was David's left middle finger, correct, on that notepad?
Yes.
The fingerprint, not the DNA, but the fingerprint itself.
Oh, I don't know. I thought you were talking about the fingerprint on the clip.
Oh,
On
no,
the
I was
magazine.
just talking about the notepad for the submit to Allah now. That's what I meant.
I'm trying to see that information.
Yeah, I think that was the left middle finger.
Yeah, it's page 20 of that 40-page BCA lab report.
Okay. I had cut
Swabbing
it
of a
all
blood
up. And,
stain, a notepad, a pen were collected from the office. Oh, this just shows what was collected. This doesn't say what the results were. Okay.
So, Sophia, do we know on that magazine clip with the blood of David's, could that have been possible when that magazine was inserted? Or was it at the very bottom while it was inserted, or was it on the side? I think it was on the side.
I think it was on the side as they
So how would the
had
blood,
picked it up.
That's the question, yeah. How would the blood get on the cartridge unless he was changing cartridges or changing magazines? But it was inserted. The clip would have been inserted.
The clip
the blood on it.
was the clip that was laying down, I think it was in a box from the pictures. It's on the outside of that clip magazine. It's not
Yes,
on the bullet.
right.
It was, they later placed for safety, they put it in the box, I think, and they tie it down. But when it was sitting on that table, they showed it ejected. And so I think it's odd that the blood stain or the spot of blood on that cartridge was actually on a location of the cartridge that when it was inserted into the weapon, which we're under the understanding that it was, how could his blood get on there at all?
Yeah. I honestly don't have an answer for that one at all.
Yeah, and I think that was, I don't think there is an answer. It's one of those things that how, you know. So whoever staged the scene got the blood on the cartridge and then threw it in the gun and laid it by David's left hand a few inches away.
And the samples that they took for the notepad was the blood stains. They actually took samples off of the notepad and the pen. And those came back to be Camille's DNA that they matched.
Okay. Which fits with the whole thing that, yeah. He used her blood, the wall, pretty much.
The wall is a female DNA profile, single source, bullet and wall. Does not match David Crowley or Rania.
Where would that blood even come from if it's from the wife? Because just because of the lack of blood that we're seeing in the whole thing, to get the blood from the body on the floor to the wall, I would think would also be somewhat messy. What the hell's going on? I don't get it. No?
I don't get it. I mean, the only thing I think back to is that off-the-wall statement that was made about mixing Camille's blood and water. You know, once you read that and then you read the DNA results, you're like, wow. Because David's DNA is not in that profile. If he's putting it on it with his hands, he's touching that wall with his hands. Skin cells are being sloughed off.
Yeah, unless he had gloves, which again makes absolutely no sense. No sense for him to put on gloves to do something like that, unless that's, you know, what somebody, I don't know what, you know, I've never actually tried to write blood on a wall, but maybe somebody should do a test. Not me. Go ahead.
Can I? This Brigitte, I'm in Fairfax. You know, thinking about writing on the wall with the blood, the Manson family took like a towel and wrote. So, but there's no towel or anything around there with cloth or something.
There's no towel with blood. You're right, but there is some towels in the basement that look like they've been bleached or have some bleach or something on them. But yeah,
but that's
where's?
how he did.
Go ahead. Oh, really? Okay, so they used a towel.
It was either a towel or a cloth or something, but I seem to remember they said it was a towel.
And a bucket, or did they go straight from the?
No, they went straight from the body and then wrote on there.
Wonder if there's any images of anything of that scene, because I'd love to compare it to this scene. Because everybody else has brought it up. There should be a lot more blood everywhere.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I'll dig up some pictures for you.
Okay, thank you. That's a really good point. And that was kind of a cult thing, right? So they're trying to say David's in some cult, in some I don't know. I've heard it all.
That's a whole different conversation, but I don't consider them as a cult so much as when I think of like the Jones people, or you know, Jonestown or something. But
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, David did have a lot of followers. You know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But that's you want to look around page 26 of the BCA lab reports if anybody wants to go and look at what Sophia's talking about. It's very interesting stuff. Anybody else want to chime in here? Should we move on to some of the more inconsistencies?
That could start off on the item number 6. Actually, item number 7. The baby was found in the arms of one of the bodies, said the neighbors Judy and Colin Prochnow. So when they looked through the glass, that's what they thought. It looked like they kept referring to it as the baby, and it was in the arms of one of the bodies. So here it was, once the image came out and was published, it was laying between the legs, actually, of Kamel, not in the arms of anybody.
Yeah.
Now, the way David's body was positioned, kind of in front of, closer to the window, I should say, is you wouldn't be able to get a good view of that anyway from the window. So why they said that, I'm not sure. The next item says the dog destroyed David and Kamel's bodies, but left Ranny. This was Mason Hendricks. Mason Hendricks says that the dog did all the work of destroying the bodies of David and Kamel, but left Ranny alone. Now, Ranny was missing her entire right arm, missing from the socket. And the police have alluded to the fact that the dog scavenged the bodies and allegedly took that arm off. Now, per last week's conversation that I had with a former detective, is an arm socket is not something a dog could pull out of a human being's arm, right out of the socket itself. This is no matter the size of the dog. So, still leads us to our question: how did the arm come off? Mason Hendricks may very well be correct here, and this may not be disinfo because if the dog left Ranny alone and a human person was responsible for removing Ranny's right arm, this would not be considered inconsistent. Would not be considered disinfo or misinfo. But for the purpose of this worksheet that's called inconsistencies, it does not tie to the police report. The police report says that the dog scavenged the bodies and accounted for all of the damage other than the gunshots.
That's true.
The next thing says here that the date that Dan Crowley Jr. dropped off the gifts. Mason Hendricks says in his article, in his interview with the Star Tribune, that he dropped off the gifts between December 26th or the 27th. Police say in the report, actually Dan Crowley Jr. states in his own testimony it was the 28th. And so Mason at the first said it was the 26th or 27th. He said he couldn't remember. That could also just be misinformation, but Dan Crowley did say that it was the 28th of the day that he dropped the gifts off at the front stoop.
And that makes I'm sorry. Let's forget again. That makes no sense to why somebody just drops gifts at a front door. I just don't get them.
Yep,
Yeah,
I agree.
Why not actually mail them or something like that? But if there's some tension, or you don't just drop them there. How are they there for 3 weeks like that? Who scattered them? Because when Colin showed up, he cleaned them all up. But to leave that there with a $14,000 check right there on the front door, this must be a neighborhood that is very, very safe. Or something. I don't know. I would never. That's a whole other topic too. But I would never do that either. So, but you know what? That's just us. Maybe that's how they were.
And here's
they're like
I clarified this just 2 nights ago on a phone call with someone about this case, and I just wanted to reiterate it here at this point, just to get everyone's bearings with the family. The Allison Crowley was living near Chicago at the time, but was over, I think, spent the week or something, or several days at the father's house there for Christmas. And so she wouldn't have been a candidate to drop off the gifts because she lives basically directly east from Dan Crowley Sr.'s home. And so Dan Crowley lives about 45 minutes south of David Crowley's home, and that's where the Christmas gathering was held as he hosted that. So if the family was there, Dan Crowley Jr. lives in the Twin Cities, which is directly in line with going to his house from his father's house, coming home would probably be close to a little less than an hour drive north from Dan Crowley Sr.'s home. But it would also be in direct line on his way to make the drop-off of the gifts. So it wasn't odd that he volunteered, so to say, because he was really the only one who could take the gifts up in that neck of the woods. And so that's, I think when they had any kind of gathering at the house or any kind of holiday or anything going on, he would be the one who would, if the family wasn't talking, to be able to make the drop-off. Now, Greg is correct in the fact that Dan Crowley Jr. and David Crowley weren't talking to each other since August of that year. So now we're at Christmas time, and this isn't just several weeks or several months. This is a good time later. They weren't even talking. He pipes up and says, "I'll take the gifts. I'll drop it off." Dan Crowley Sr. says, "Here's a brown paper bag too with some other things, some mail, some things related to David. There's a check in there, whatever, in an envelope." And so he grabs all the gifts, drops it all off. Now, I don't think he had any intention of ringing the doorbell or knocking on the door anyway, because they were no longer talking. They were fighting for whatever reason. And so he either did it out of good faith and just dropped it off and left, or if it was something more sinister, it was a reason to get back to that property with a good alibi to do something in good faith by dropping off those gifts. But in reality, wanted to possibly stop and get a look into that window because the curtains may have been left open on purpose for that very reason, knowing he would come back later. And maybe why the dining room light was left on as well. If he dropped off those gifts at night, it'd be a clearer shot to look inside and get a glimpse of something without appearing to be doing anything sinister. So lots of scenarios there, but the question is, why did Mason Hendricks say 26th or 27th? I don't feel he needed to give a date at all to the newspaper.
Hi,
Why
this is Louise.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I've got the Death of Dystopian article up, and it's saying about on Christmas morning, David made a list of plans for the coming year, the Christmas 6-day countdown. Then, with a pistol that he kept in a safe in the bedroom, he shot Kamal Rania as they lay on the living room floor. Sometime later, he sat down beside them and shot himself. The next morning, Dan Jr. left presents for David, Kamal and Rania on their doorstep. The family dog put its paws on the frame of the picture window and watched him, but he didn't look inside. So now it's saying the next morning, so that would say the 26th.
Oh, that's right. So that's in the documentary.
It's
That's right. I had forgot. It does say the 26th in the documentary that Dan was there. So now it even adds more confusion.
I can't remember if they actually say that in the documentary. This is on the New Yorker article that I'm reading from. I know in the documentary he does say about he was going to go over on Christmas Eve, and then he talked himself out of it, and then I kind of think they just skimmed over when he took the gifts. I can't remember off the top of my head to be able to confirm either way, but in this article it definitely says the next morning.
Okay. that may be misinformation then from Alec Wilkinson. Because it goes back to the whole point that if someone, if your brother and their family was massively murdered, you certainly would not forget the date that you last dropped off gifts at the door. Now, it's also winter in Minnesota, so it's hard for people to get their head around dropping anything at the front stoop. But in that neighborhood and in the Midwest here, I guess it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to have gifts at the front desk, front stoop for a day or two without anyone having to take them. It's fairly common, as Greg was alluding to, that it wasn't common for him, but for here it would be. 3 weeks, I think, would be very bizarre. But several days.
Stretching it.
Yeah, that's stretching it there, but I do think that he wanted to drop off the gifts, and it wouldn't have been Allison saying, "Hey, I'm going to drop off the gifts now and drive 45 minutes out of town just to go backwards the other way to go back home." So I think that was it always would have been Dan Jr. doing that sort of thing.
I agree.
Wasn't there some mention about him going there on the 23rd or something like that too? Right?
Yeah, 24th.
He drove by?
Louise just mentioned, that he said he was going to go on the 24th on Christmas Eve afternoon or evening, but then talked himself out of it, quote, before he did it. So that's the first we've ever heard of any of that. And
Mason Hendricks told me kind of the same thing, basically, but I think he told me a different date.
And that could have been. And the funny thing with Dan Crowley Jr. is, now we get this inserted piece of information that he wanted to go there in good faith once again on the 24th. Now that came out of nowhere, but it's his way of saying that because he turned around and talked himself out of it, he did not go, which means he wasn't his way of saying he wasn't at the home Christmas Eve. Now, if we go back to Sean Wright's tweet, was a photo of a Christmas tree on Christmas Eve that night. And Sean Wright was not in the habit of tweeting at all in the year 2014. But for some reason that night he made a tweet, which I took personally as some sort of alibi of where he was, that he was at home celebrating Christmas. So if the killings did take place on Christmas Eve, during the night of Christmas Eve, that's Dan Crowley Jr. now once again saying, in other words, I wasn't there. I thought about it and turned back around and went home. So we still don't know if the neighbor who looked across and saw David Crowley allegedly standing at the window glaring at him, which was Christmas Eve, if that really was David Crowley, or if the family was already killed at that point, was it someone else standing there? I was looking at Brett Millay from across the street. So there's still speculation out there that the crimes could have been, committed on Christmas Eve, or the 25th, or the 26th.
Didn't that same guy Brent or Brett, depending on which police report you're reading, the name is different, but didn't he also say something about seeing the presents there on Christmas Eve? The presents on the door? Or on the doorstep or whatever?
I don't believe so. I went through my notes
I'm gonna have to go back.
Again from my conversation with him, because I did speak with him, and he also just reiterated his first name is Brett. The police report.
Okay, good.
Brett. So that was an inconsistency. I don't know if it's worthy to put on a Google Doc. That was another inconsistency. And he said he saw him, and they always got along, a friendly hi or a wave or something, or the mailboxes there. His was also across the street in that same clump with David Crowley's. So they would meet each other at the mailbox or something, but never ever did he have someone across the street glare at him like he did that night of the Christmas Eve. They have since moved, so I can't get a hold of him, but it would be nice to confirm if that was who he saw was really, in fact, David Crowley or someone else.
Well, because if you're just going by what the police reports say, you would think that he says that it's David. That's the way that I'm reading. Of course, it's all summarized, so it's not really coming from him. But
correct. Yeah, he did think it was.
Good.
He did think it was David, but I don't know if there's any way to to prove it actually was. Of course, he assumed it was because that's who lived in the house. But he also stated that the curtains on that front window were always closed, only during that 3-week period where they opened the entire time. So that's an inconsistency in itself, the front curtains.
And that can be found on page 23 of the 94-page PDF, if anybody wants to check that out. But the actual quote here about the presents is, quote, that he did not notice the Christmas presents on the front step until today, which would be 1/17. So for 3 weeks he didn't notice it.
And that's very bizarre. And he lives directly across the street. I mean, just backing out of the driveway in his car, he'd probably see them in the rearview mirror.
Going to get his mail?
Getting his mail every day. You'd still see those gifts, those bright colored gifts sitting there. So, very odd. Should I move on to the next thing?
Yeah, unless anybody else has anything else they want to say on this. Everybody's free to talk. You can unmute yourself as long as there's no background noise.
This next one is one of my favorites. The dog was shot at by David because David, quote, tried to kill the dog. Now, Mason Hendricks, Judy Prochnow, both said this several times, that, once the documentary comes out, we'll all be able to see the evidence that David tried to kill the dog. Well, the documentary's out. We've seen all the photos. There's no gunshot holes at the length, at the height of a dog. So the thing here says no reports of low-level bullet holes throughout the home in the police reports. And so the only thing we can think of here is why they said this is that 6 shots were fired, but 4 shots were fired killing people. 1 for Randy, 2 for Kamel, 1 for David. That's 4 shots that, entered human flesh, but 6 shots were fired. Where did the other 2 go? Well, 1 was fired down at the floorboards that went through and ended up in the basement, and we don't know where the other one, it's unaccounted for. So I think this is Mason Hendricks' way of saying they can explain away the gunshots of David trying to kill Paleo. As a normal person on a suicide pact would not be shooting random shots that don't equal the number of shots fired at the people. So I think this was his way of saying David was shooting at the dog because he went crazy. And no, I'm of the belief that once that first shot rang out, Paleo probably darted to the basement and hid there the entire time. So he wasn't probably anywhere near. David, with a background in the military and the Army, and was, quote, a sharpshooter to some extent, wouldn't have missed the dog even if he tried. Louise Gibson, I think, has even mentioned in the past, and she's on the call here tonight too, that the dog kennel or the dog cage was right there by that front door. If you wanted to kill the dog, you could have kenneled him up, shut the door, and shot him right there. So all of this is misinformation or disinformation to get everyone sidetracked. David was not out trying to shoot the dog. Yes, go ahead. Someone on?
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Hi. I'm Robert from New York.
Hi, Robert.
How you doing?
Good.
One of the things that's just been baffling me is like the 6 shots and none of the neighbors called the police. It drives me crazy that all these shots went off and the houses are in close proximity and nobody called the cops. It just drives me nuts. I don't understand that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And for the new followers and new listeners out there, is the handgun used was a .40 caliber with no silencer, and these are hollow point bullets.
Exactly.
These homes are maybe 20, 30 feet apart in a pretty close together neighborhood. And the shots were on the main level floor next to a large picture window with the curtain open, which would have echoed through the entire neighborhood like that. So it's fair to say, we can't prove it, but it's fair to say a silencer or suppressor or something was used because there was not a single phone call to police that in those range of days to that neighborhood for, number one, suspicious activity, and
Well, I
number two,
did read
gunshots.
somewhere that one of the neighbors heard shots and stepped outside and thought it was fireworks and then went back in the home.
Yep. And there was two instances, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was one of a neighbor earlier in the month of December that thought they heard gunshots, and we can rule that out.
That was Colin. Yeah,
And
that was
then
Colin Prochnow.
And then Colin, later, I think he was the second one, who said he heard shots the 19th or the 18th or early morning hours of the 19th, which was that Friday, the last day of school that they picked up Ranny, maybe that night, over the night. Colin, the very next door neighbor, heard what he thought was gunshots. And so he stepped out, never heard it again, and went back inside. Now, we know for a fact that the family was already eating a smash burger on the 21st of December. In amount, the billed amount that came to appear to be a family of 3. So my personal opinion is that the entire family was alive for sure on the 21st, which rules out anything that Colin Prochnow says about gunshots.
Right.
About 6 gunshots without a silencer or suppressor would have sounded like a cannon going off in that neighborhood, and there would have been calls to police for suspicious activity or gunshots because it would have certainly sounded like 4th of July fireworks going off, regardless of the time of day. Now, the other explanation that I've heard personally is that because it was around Christmas time, many people in the area were visiting family and friends and were quote, out of town, therefore they didn't hear it. Well, that's not a very good explanation. I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree.
But that would have been an extremely loud gun going off. And we've posted videos before from YouTube. You can do a search on YouTube for outdoor gun firing of a .40 caliber handgun weapon. And just watch how loud that is. And that's a very loud weapon. Go ahead.
No.
Okay. So that's very loud. So I think what we have here is a silencer, suppressor, something like that was used. Now, we also have proof that David's personal weapon that he was found there at the scene that he owned and was registered to him was not threaded. His barrel was not threaded for a silencer or a suppressor. So that really brings into question, was David's weapon at the scene even used in the commission of this crime at all, or was it simply laid there?
Yeah, so the first one was from Colin. It's on page 12 of the 94 pages. First he says maybe around the 9th or 10th, then he changes it to the 19th. But the second person is another neighbor, and that I'm looking for the actual quote now, but that was from sometime between Christmas Eve and the New Year. I'm trying to find that exact quote. It's in my article. I mean, it might be easier if I just pull up the article on that. But so he wasn't exactly sure, and he wasn't home on Christmas. So it was like, well, if he did hear those shots, the thing was it would have had to have been Christmas Eve. Let me find that.
Well, that'd be interesting. I know. I think there was one other report of the neighbors hearing something closer to the beginning of the month of December, I think.
Oh, really? Okay.
That I think had nothing to do with anything.
Doubt it.
But yeah, look for that, Greg, because that's very interesting.
Okay.
Because
yeah, I'm looking for it.
More and more, I'm leaning toward a Christmas Eve potentially.
And not to change the subject, but there's something else that's been on my mind. I've had many dogs throughout my life. I've rescued a lot of dogs, and the arm and the hands and the dog gnawing on these body parts, a lot of times dogs would get bored and not chew the whole bone. You know, to have these bones just gone and no traces of it, it doesn't make sense to me. Like Rainey's arm, like there should be parts of this arm that are gnawed on and left on the floor, because the dog will chew the meat, and yes, they will do that, but they will not eat the complete bone.
Yeah, we've had that's a good question, Robert, because Laura was on, and I'm not sure if Laura's on here tonight, but she is from Arkansas, and she had mentioned in the past of her background with dogs and animals and what dogs can and cannot eat and what they will and will not eat. But
Right.
we had all basically assumed that if the dog was hungry and starving, they would go after the fleshy, meaty parts of the body,
Exactly.
stomach, a thigh, something to that effect, when they're hungry. But she said they do love that bone marrow inside the bone. But I think that was what Laura was trying to say there. This is my opinion. I may have gotten it wrong, but if they're chewing on something as a snack and just playing with something, they love to get into that bone marrow. So the dog to eat to survive would be eating meaty, fleshy parts. And then in his spare time when he's bored, gnawing on the bone and whatnot. And what you're saying, Robert, is that the bone is missing altogether. And that's what I've said from the beginning. There's got to be a bone remaining, chunks of bones or something. Now, Laura had mentioned also that they will gnaw that all down into a fine dust, and it actually will be gone.
Right.
Now, she has said that, but that's.
But the other thing is that those 2 bags of dog food, one half open, and the dog didn't try to rip it open at all. They're just sitting there, nicely sit in the corner, and they're not. It just drives me nuts that this dog. Yeah.
That's a good point, Robert, because that one photo does show a brand new bag of, looks to me like a 40-pound bag of dog food.
Right.
Or a 30-pound bag that's unopened, and then next to it is a same exact bag that is open and about half gone or 3/4 gone. But a dog, being hungry enough, would certainly smell that out, push it over, scratch into it, and start eating it.
Exactly.
And so that was never, the images that it shows in that photograph was that the dog food was never even touched. Looked like the dog never even sniffed around it, could care less.
Right.
But the other thing that someone with the dog background would say, had made a quote saying, even if dog food was there, if the dog was hungry enough, they'd still go to the nearest available dog or food source, which means the bodies, decomposing bodies are sitting there. Why go through the hassle of the dog food? Go right to the bodies.
Right.
That's what someone had said, too, with the dog, a background such as that, which could explain why the dog didn't go to the dog food at all.
Well, thank you.
But who knows if the dog was actually in that home all 3 weeks or in the entire duration. That's still up for debate as well. That rear slider being opened leaves a lot of doors open, so to say, because we know there wasn't a water source for the dog.
Yeah, I noticed that. The toilet bowl was empty.
And the basement bathtub was plugged with a rubber stopper, which means it looks to be had been filled at some point. But if the dog was jumping in and out of there drinking water, you would have seen blood or paw prints or...
Right, that's the other question. No paw prints, no bloody paw prints anywhere.
There's nothing.
No.
So it's very strange. The dog would not have been able to reach over with his neck into that bathtub to drink. He wasn't a tall greyhound or something like that.
I think it was like 25 pounds, right? Or something
it was a mid-sized beagle mix. So he would have had to jump in to get access to that water, if in fact it was filled with water for that purpose to drink. And so the question, if it was filled with water, who filled it? Was it David, filling the water for the dog to live off? That rules out the theory of him trying to kill the dog. Or was it the perpetrators feeling sorry for the dog, leaving some water there before they snuck out the back? But very good questions. There would be whether or not the dog eats the bone or the arm. It wouldn't make sense why the dog would eat the hands of Camel.
Right.
Which are neither meaty or fleshy. and they're underneath her body as she laid on her stomach with her arms crossed. So how would the dog get at it? But the really big question is back to that socket. The dog can't pull the entire arm out of the shoulder socket. How did it get out? Now, we do know that
you got to kind of.
Randy had a cracked or a fractured rib underneath her armpit. It wouldn't have been caused by a dog.
And I always wondered, like, that, David's arm looked like it had blood on it. Like, I always wondered if that was him holding his child, like the blood all on his arm. I think it was his right arm. It's on his white shirt. It was all blood there on that portion of the arm.
Correct. It was his right arm. Yep.
Right. And then his hand being taken off, and if the dog did that, there's no marks on the bones there, which I forgot that lady's name who did that YouTube video.
Catherine?
Yes, and she's there was so clean cut that almost like it was severed off, but like it just drives me nuts. All these questions I have. Sorry.
And they're all good. They're good questions because the dog, tearing at it would be one thing, pulling it and ripping it would be one thing, but a clean severed,
right.
cut.
And she said there was nothing on those bones. It was so clean. And you would think that there would be some chew marks or something. And there's even the flesh, she said, there was no teeth marks on there.
Yeah, it's a good point. We don't know. All we know is the police report said that they assumed the dog scavenged the bodies, but
right.
If the dog, there's still a chance that the dog may not have touched the bodies at all from a scavenging point of view. Who knows? Now the bullets, once again, I'll go back to the fact that I mentioned earlier, the hollow points that were used on this .40 caliber handgun, they would have caused extreme damage and blowout of the back of the skulls, or the front of the skulls here. And then I can see the dog going after that, the flesh and the broken remains and the charred pieces of bone, but not for instance eating the entire, accounting for 3 hands and 1 arm and 2 skulls.
Because Carmel's head was completely missing, right?
I believe so. We didn't have any photos of that, but the police report said it was for the most part missing altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good questions. Good questions. The next item here says that Sidra says David cussed out Mr. Alam. Mr. Alam says he didn't. Let's get back into what Sidra versus Mr. Alam. The person who wrote it here that says someone's lying and it's disinformation. I think I can probably talk to this as I talk to Mr. Alam on the phone. We know the story from Sidra that says that David cussed out the father and really got angry and was cursing at him and angry about something. This was back in October. And what Mr. Alam said on the phone was that he did not seem that angry to him. He was upset, and they certainly were having a disagreement, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary, nothing that was that big of a deal. So I don't know if it's actually that someone was lying, for instance, or it just could have been misinterpreted, for instance. Now, we know that Sidra wasn't on the phone on that conversation, so what she overheard was just simply that. She overheard it. She did say her father was extremely upset afterwards, and I think she said he was near crying or he did have tears or something. Now, speaking with him, he said it wasn't, the case. They had a disagreement, and that was it. And there was possibly some yelling, but it wasn't as extreme as what Sidra said. So that's a fair topic for this spreadsheet called inconsistencies, because it is an inconsistency, but we don't know for sure.
Hey, Dan, I was able to find that on page 56, and it talks about one of the neighbors who says that he heard 3 rapid gunshots sometime between December 24th and Christmas Day. Wait, no. was uncertain. Yeah, he couldn't say if it happened before or after New Year's. So definitely sometime around Christmas, though.
Wow, so that is interesting. Now, and he said he heard 3 rapid fire?
3 rapid fire, and they have that quoted. So they put quotes around rapid fire, meaning that's his actual words. But,
And so we know 6 shots were fired. Unless they were at different times, there was still some contention that David allegedly killed Kamel and Rani first, and then spent 3 days in some sort of forgiveness prayer with the Quran before offing himself. Now, any scenario of David not killing himself right away, if indeed he did it, means that there's 2 separate instances then that neighbors did not hear gunshots. So if the neighbor here did hear them, and this was Christmas Eve, he would have heard probably all 6. But if he did hear 3, that at least would make sense. Now, even mind you this, with a silencer, with a suppressor, it's extremely loud. So a neighbor could certainly hear 3 gunshots with a silencer or a suppressor threaded onto that barrel of a .40 caliber. Now, it's not like the movies where you fire off these rounds with a silencer and you don't hear anything. It's still very loud. It's just suppressed. So if this was Christmas Eve, that could be something then.
Yeah, saying sometime before New Year's Eve, and he couldn't say exactly when, but he says it happened on or around Christmas Day. Oh, no, he said he could not say that it happened on or around Christmas Day, but it did happen sometime before New Year's Eve. So, okay, that's interesting. Just another tidbit there.
Interesting.
But that goes back to the thing, why didn't he call the cops? He just heard 3 rapid fire gunshots, and that's it. Back to work. Yeah.
And this was the neighbor behind the house?
This is Alan
Slider.
Alan Olson, who also lived behind the Crowley residence, yes.
And behind would make sense with that open rear slider, if it was even open at the time, but easy to hear with that door being open a quarter of an inch. Okay, very good. Next thing was Sidra created a GoFundMe campaign. Now this was also the GoFundMe campaign for the new followers out there was a campaign created by Dan Crowley Jr. in the aftermath of this to raise a goal of $6 million for Nyla Alam. Mason Hendricks told me in a private message that Sidra created the campaign. And now we know that that's not true. That's why it's on the inconsistencies list here, because Sidra was unsure of even who set it up herself. She found out, along with her father, Mr. Alam, that a fundraiser was set up. A campaign was set up to raise funds, and once they heard that, they were immediately wanted to shut it down and find out who did it, because this was very against their Muslim background and faith to be asking for money like this. Very looked down upon. They would never do something like this, even if they did need the funds. So they found out it was Dan Crowley and had him shut it down, and he did. A week later, I think, by that time it had raised $8,000 and some odd dollars. Now, I myself did make a contribution to that fund and did promptly receive an email receipt back saying, Dan Crowley Jr. likes to thank you for your donation, as it was directed into his bank account. So I've got a receipt when I made a donation to that fund that certainly shows Dan Crowley Jr. set it up. So Sidra had nothing to do with setting up that. That's more disinformation from Mason Hendricks. Why he would say that, I have no clue. The next line says, inside the living room, the couch cushions were ripped up. This was neighbor Judy Prochnow. When they first saw the mannequins or the bodies that day looking in the window, she looks like the sofa cushion was tore up. And I think that makes sense now when we see the image of all of the debris in the house. And I believe that was potentially just misinformation. It did probably look like a couch cushion ripped up by the dog. But there was a lot of debris, hair, and things all around the house that certainly looked like a couch. But the couch itself, I didn't see any image of that couch being ripped up or tore at all. The recliner, the chair, the sectional sofa, nothing was bit up by the dog from what the photo evidence shows. Now, Mason Hendricks is also responsible for this next line item. He made a quote that David's fingerprints were on the gun. This would make sense. It's David's gun. It's registered to him. Of course, his fingerprints would be on it. After the BCA did the lab analysis, they were unable to conclude and get any match of any fingerprints on that weapon. So this is your very first red flag as an investigator. If there's no fingerprints on the weapon, they were rubbed down, wiped off, something. Why, if you were in a pact with your wife to kill yourself or suicide or gone crazy, would you take the time to wipe your weapon down? But that's it, and that is actually a fact. The BCA was unable to match any fingerprints on that weapon. Mason said David's fingerprints were on the gun. That is not correct.
Right.
The next one says there was a door stop in the bottom of the rear slider that prevented it from closing all the way, that prevented it from opening. This is also courtesy of Mason Hendricks. Now, we know that there was no evidence of any type of lock on that rear slider. In fact, it was open 1/4 of an inch and was unlocked. So why Mason said this, I don't know. It ties back in. It kind of dovetails into what Sean Wright said by saying there was a kick lock used on that rear slider, that it appeared as if it was opened a little bit, but it still wouldn't have been able to gain access. We know the police rallied there on that back patio and gained entrance. Once they got that catch pole for the dog, they went in and cleared the residence right away. There was nothing in that door. So Mason Hendricks now has got another piece of disinformation talking about a door stop.
Yeah, you're gonna have
any
a
other
whole book
questions?
pretty soon.
I've got through 15 of them now. Any other questions from the callers and the chat room?
There was somebody who asked a question about if we thought David was going down the rabbit hole, or if David felt like he was going down that rabbit hole. And I think that's been brought up a couple times too, I think, about, well, how much did David really believe this stuff? Was he just researching it? Was he just in it to make some money? Or, was he going to save the whole world? I mean, I think it's a relevant thing.
I think it's
he
relevant.
didn't start researching this.
Yeah, I think it's a relevant question. Because once you go down the rabbit hole, there's many multitudes of rabbit holes when you get into the whole conspiracy. And then once you start researching enough and finding out that some of these are in fact true, it takes you down many of those. So I think it's fair to say that at David's level, by making a movie or a web series and everything else here that he was doing, he obviously believed it, and he was moving down that, and he knew well enough that he was down that rabbit hole. He knew. Yeah, he wasn't guessing and just assuming things. He had enough information to make write a script about this. So I think he was aware of it. Any other comments? The next item was a quote that said the dog left Randy's body alone. Very similar to the one I read earlier. Once again, Mason Hendricks. Randy was missing her entire right arm. But if the dog did do it, that's some interesting information. Now, it's still an inconsistency because the police report said that the dog accounted for all of the scavenging. Now, with all of I'd like to just interject one thing here to keep everyone's minds on. With Mason Hendricks, Judy Prochnow, and Sean Wright, because they're the ones contributing to most of this disinformation, sometimes with people who work in this field and spread disinformation on purpose, include nuggets of truth as well. So just because it's disinfo, keep in mind that they may know more than they're letting on, and maybe leaving little breadcrumbs of truth mixed in, knowing that we're going to discount everything they say as disinformation and write it off. And so that whole phrase with Mason Hendricks saying that they mix the blood with water to do the writing, that seems like an odd thing to just throw out there.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a nugget of truth out there. Him saying that the dog left Randy's body alone, that could very well be true. Which means Mason Hendricks knows something that we should be looking into. But
yeah, he would have to know something that the cops don't, because that's not what they're saying. Why are these guys over and over contradicting what the cops are saying? I don't get it. I really don't.
Yep, I mean, it's true. I think that if you put yourself into your situation here, if this was your family or loved ones or something, you'd take two sides. You'd be, number one, either upset that a group like this is asking questions and you'd ignore it, or you'd be all in by saying, you know what, those are some good questions. I also would like to find out. But I can't think of a scenario where you would jump in and start spreading disinformation to purposely throw people off the track, unless you've got something to hide, or unless you've got something that you don't want to come out. That's the only two scenarios I can think of where you'd ever. If my family was killed this way, I would certainly not be on these pages worrying about a Facebook group. You'd be going through the different levels of grief and dealing with the emotion of all this. But these guys were on from day one on these Justice for David Crowley Facebook pages, spending all their time drumming up this disinformation. And that's what really is strange, because at the same time, they kept telling us that they were so busy grieving, going through the grieving process. So, doesn't add up. The next one here on the inconsistencies says that, quote, body parts were all over the house. And this is another one, Mason Hendricks. In actuality, lead investigator Gummert even confirmed later with Greg Fernandez on an email, saying there was no body parts found at the scene. With the exception of small pieces in the upstairs living room, there was no body parts at all in that home, other than the bodies themselves. And so Mason said that body parts are all over the house. Who knows?
Which is another lie. Basically.
Which is another lie.
Yep.
Unless at one point during that 3 weeks, there may have been body parts all over the house. But how would Mason Hendricks know that? So once again, it's very fishy information. But the pictures that were shown, we've seen, all of us have seen the pictures, the 464 photos. There was no body parts around that home on the crime scene photos. Now, if there were, police then would have the right to censor or filter them out from being given to the public. And so that's why Greg went the extra step to ask, to confirm with Officer Gummert, did we just not receive those photos of the body parts in the house because of the gruesome nature, or were there none? And that's when Gummert wrote back and says, there were no body parts found at the scene. Very strange. Yeah. The next one, the money from the GoFundMe went straight into Sidra's account, Mason Hendricks. As we mentioned before, Sidra was not even aware of the account. Dan Crowley set it up. Dan Crowley Jr. did not know Sidra, if at all, very well, much less to know her bank account to set it up to direct the funds into her personal bank account. So this is more disinformation. We know the funds went into Dan Crowley Jr.'s bank account, and then he proceeded, once it was given the instruction to shut it down, the $8,000 that was made, he turned that money over and did a withdrawal or a transfer or a wire transfer or a check or something to the Alam family. They did receive that money. It never did hit Sidra's account. The next comment here says David was, quote, down and out about not getting the contract for the movie deal. Now, the Gray State team as a whole went on and on about this in the aftermath of the bodies being found. You know, once again, pushing the narrative that David was down and out and caused himself to go into this deep depression spiral and ended it all. Well, my interview with the president of Michael Entertainment Group, or MEG, Michael Boggio, he said, no, the offer was still on. They were, in fact, working on it, and that's what David was busy working on, rewriting this script, turning this massive movie script into a web series or a television series, breaking it out into multiple episodes. He never walked away from it. They never fired him. He never cut ties. There was no truth to that about David not getting the contract.
So whatever happened to the Gray State movie? Does anybody know?
Greg, can you talk to that?
You talking about the script, or
Yeah,
what do you mean? Because there was no
Well,
movie.
Well, I mean, I know there wasn't, but there was the chance to put it in. So is the project dead, or?
I think it's dead. I think Danny Mason is still going to try to move forward with it, but I think it's really stupid if he's, if anybody is going to move forward with this, especially those guys, because they all think that their friend killed his family and then killed himself, So, but as far as the script or anything like that, I think that's the furthest that it got was. It was about to be made into a TV series. What happens to it now is a whole nother issue that is really anybody's guess. You'd have to look at who would own that, and then kind of go from there. But I'll be very, very curious to see in 2019 next year what Danny Mason or what anybody else does, because Danny Mason considers himself a creator of this Gray State project, and there is one photo out there that shows that he helped write this story, the very first story. It's since changed, but so it could be a big mess when you think about all the different people who might have rights to it.
Good point.
Does the Michael Entertainment Group, do they have, their contract signed? Do they have any type of lien on it or anything like that? Do the families, does Danny Mason? I'd be very, very curious to see where that goes, and they're going to try to do that quietly, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's an
I don't know. Did that help? Did that solve any or help answer the question?
No, I was just kind of curious, because I mean, we're all focused around that potential movie, and then it was just kind of it stopped because
I could add a little more, shed a little more light on that as well. What is your name again?
Brigitte.
Oh yes. Oh, hi.
I'm in Virginia.
Oh, hi, Brigitte. I could shed a little more on that. What we know, and what Greg's mentioning about the 2019 is the certificate on the wall for the Gray State project that David owned or had rights to was from the Screen Actors Guild, I believe,
right.
and the project ended, the expiration of, I don't know if it's a 5-year deal or whatever, signed in 2014, expires in 2019. So I think he's got rights for that 5-year window for that entire project. Now, Danny August Mason, we have evidence to support that he wanted to continue on with it, in the fact that 5 months after the bodies are found, he did create a new business in the state of Minnesota called Gray State Universe LLC, and then got a lawyer to do a trademark copyright trademark of the Gray State logo. So he was moving forward full steam ahead with taking this script, and I think he also had the script, a version of it, and was moving forward, creating a company to move forward with this movie. Somewhere along the way, it stopped, or it got tabled, or it got halted, and I don't know if someone contacted Danny by saying you don't have the rights to it until 2019, and so if that's the case, he's got to lie low for a couple of years to make it happen, because his state of Minnesota certificate with the state for his business has gone unexpired and unpaid, and it's no longer. There is no Gray State Universe LLC in the state of Minnesota because it expired. So it lapsed, essentially. The other thing is, David's script was written and it was owned by Hothead Productions, the company that David owned 100% of. So that script, Hothead Productions, was owned by David 100%. So if and when he did die, that goes now to his next of kin, which would be Kamel. Well, she's dead. It goes down to the next of kin family, which is Rani. She's dead. And so it would go to the family. So the asset. So if we call that script, that movie script, a $30 million value on that movie script, who does it go to, the Crowleys or the Alams? Dan Crowley Sr., I think, took it upon himself to say that it came now to him, and I think he was working with Danny Mason on pushing this project forward. Now, the Alams could argue from a legal standpoint, if the next of kin is both 50% Alams and 50% Crowleys, that because David actually committed the act of the killing, his next of kin should not deserve to receive any assets and not deserve to benefit in any way, shape, or form because he was the killer. So 100% of the assets of anything David had now would go to the Alam family, which includes that script. So legally, I think they are the owners of that script. Now, they're not going to move forward with doing anything with it, but at least they can, I believe, from a legal standpoint, prevent anyone else from as well. Now, that's neither here nor there. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I think we've got evidence to support that Danny August Mason wants to move forward and actually has made business decisions based on moving the project forward. So that's all we can say about that. I don't know. The 2019 thing comes into play, and so we'll see in the year 2019 if he does want to do something with it. But I think his intent was to make the movie, make the project, pitch it to Hollywood producers, and make the money and be known as the finish this project and make millions from it. I think was his intent, which to me proves now that there's motive, because he did not wait years or months later to do this. This was 5 months after the bodies were discovered. He already had the copyright and a business set up.
Wow.
So he moved quickly on this entire thing, which to me, as for looking at it from the standpoint of the Apple Valley detectives, would be a huge motive, huge red flag, because now you've got someone standing to personally gain that never actually has been interviewed or had to testify or even was considered a suspect, who's now essentially walking away scot-free and possibly taking the entire thing. Now, when police interviewed him for their testimony, not as a suspect, but just getting the background information, they asked Danny August Mason directly what his role was in the Gray State project. Greg, if you got it handy there, I think Danny August Mason goes out of his way to tell police he had no role other than being, quote, an actor in the movie, in the film, right, and the trailer, and he was nothing, had no connection from a business standpoint at all. So now you get Danny August Mason essentially lying to police, because he was a co-creator. He's the one who pitched the story, I think, originally to David Crowley, and the two of them wrote the script. They were co-creators, founders of this entire project. So, but right away when they came to question him, he says, "No, I'm simply an actor. I had no other connections to this project. I had no way to stand to gain at all personally from this." And Danny August Mason had, I think, $30 million motive to grab this. That's why I would say, in my opinion, that he would be on your suspect pool. Not saying he did it, just saying he'd be in my suspect pool right out of the get-go, especially with the evidence showing that he's actually moving forward with the project. Being as, getting a lawyer to trademark the logo, starting up a company, taking the script. And now the alums even went so far as to mention that they had never even been asked permission, from Danny August Mason or Dan Crowley Sr. if they were going to move forward with the script, even to simply ask, hey, do you guys mind if we move forward with it? Do you guys mind if we take the script and do something about it? Sidra says to Natasha that they never once even brought up the script. And one could argue from a legal standpoint that the script is actually 100% theirs. So that's a whole nother ball game, but
so that's on page
a little
20.
more to it. What's that?
That's what he tells the cops is on page 20, between page 28 and page 31 of that 94-page PDF.
Yep, and that's not my words. Those are his. That's Danny August Mason's words that he told police directly, that he had nothing to do with it other than being an actor in the trailer, and that is outright not true.
So he lied to the police.
Correct. Now keep in mind, for the new listeners out there as well, who are the two leading people conducting interviews, going on television, doing radio, newspaper, and magazine interviews in this case on behalf of the Crowley family? It was Danny August Mason and Mason Hendricks. The two filling up our page of inconsistencies here are the two who have garnered the most attention on searing this narrative. That's where, if we've got anyone listening in on this conference call from the Apple Valley Police Department, that's where you needed to be focusing your attention. The bad guys essentially were right in your midst, under your nose the entire time. Not that they did it, but they certainly would be in the suspect pool. Once you're in the suspect pool, then the authorities then can start doing their alibi checks to start ruling people out. And Mason Hendricks would not have been ruled out as a suspect, and Danny August Mason would not have been ruled out as a suspect. And both of those would have means, motive, and opportunity to commit the commission of this crime. In my opinion, that is. All right, we've got a couple left here. 4 left. Half of Randy's ashes are with David, and the other half of her ashes are with Comel. We're not sure who said that, but we just got confirmation last week from Natasha after talking with Sidra, and this came up earlier when someone first mentioned at the beginning, I think, of possibly the broadcast, was what took so long for Randy's ashes to get squared away? And Greg, I think you can talk to this, but Comel, her body was flown to Texas for the funeral. David's body was cremated and given to Dan Crowley Sr., and Randy's body was cremated and given to Dan Crowley Sr. They were trying to work out a deal to give half the ashes to one side of the family and give the other to the other half. Well, in the midst of all this going on with the documentary and the investigation, and people's lives got busy, it never happened. As of last week, Randy's ashes were still confirmed by Sidra and Natasha that they were still in Dan Crowley Sr.'s home. So that comment that was made back then of half and half or split is incorrect. Now the update as of today, I think, Greg, can you comment on this? Sidra did contact Dan Crowley Sr. and asked if she could fly up on her own expense to get the ashes, or if he can mail them down to her at her expense. They just want half of her ashes. And he says, yes, I'll overnight them to you on Wednesday or Thursday, I'm not sure. And he agreed to do that. So as far as we know, they're on their way and they're en route right now. But the main question is, what took 3 years to get this accomplished? Greg, can you talk to that?
To which part? To what took three years? I'm as baffled as everybody. But,
not why they took it, not
Yeah.
why the 3 years, but they are in fact en route right now. And were they received?
Yes.
The plan was to get them today. Friday they were supposed to arrive. Have you heard any updates?
Yeah. They were hoping to get them on for it to come on Friday. It looks like it was sent out Friday, so hopefully tomorrow they can get those, and then they can, bury them next to Kamel.
Yeah, and the family, it sounds like the family was going to have a little ceremony type of a thing with close family and friends to do that, to finally put the Randy's ashes to rest and to bring at least a little bit of closure to that, but they can't do that until those ashes arrive, and it sounds like that'll be tomorrow, the 24th.
That's so sad.
Yeah, that's very, of the people that I've talked to, Greg, you could probably comment as well, that really hits home for a lot of people following this case. I mean, this is a 5-year-old little girl who did nothing wrong and is the victim in all this, but yet her ashes are the ones that still haven't been taken care of 3 years later. I mean, that's just disgusting, I think. But that's all my own opinion. Any other comments out there? The next item here says, quote, "I'll be looking forward to meeting Sidra at her request." This was a comment stated by neighbor Judy Prochnow. This was on a Facebook post in early 2015. This was before March. March was the time frame in March 2015 that Sidra flew up to Minneapolis, and then Officer Gummert and the detectives met with the Crowleys, the Alams, and then went over the entire deal in March. And Judy was at this time already inserted herself into the situation, and said, "I'm looking forward to meeting her because she wants to meet me." Well, I had a private message with Sidra, and she says, "I've never met Judy in my life, and in fact, I've never talked to her." So Sidra said, "I've never spoke to the neighbor, and why would I want to meet her?" So that's another inconsistency from Judy Prochnow. I think they did end up meeting that time in March when they came in and spoke, but Judy made it sound like Sidra just couldn't wait to be meeting Judy, and that was not the case. The other quote, we've got two here, more to go. The other quote says, in the middle of the bodies lay the Koran. Tom Lydon, the Fox 9 investigator, made this comment. The photo here clearly, the fact is the matter, the photo clearly shows that the Koran was on the left side of David, where the gun allegedly had been. The Koran was not in the middle of the body, so it was on the outside, closer to the window, in between David and the window. So we don't know if this was just made up for effect, to sell the story.
Fake news.
Or fake news. And the final last thing here is Komel's body was closest, quote, closest to the tree. This is from the New Yorker in Alec Wilkinson's article. Now we know here the facts here mentions Komel was nowhere near the tree. In fact, she was furthest away from it. So one more piece to the puzzle here of items. That's what I've got for the inconsistencies here so far. Once again, this file is available to be edited and added to. If you can think of anything else, we're going to try to compile one big list. It's one thing over the 3 years that we've never done is compile a complete list of inconsistencies. So hopefully this will be our starting point. Any comments in the chat room for instance? So hopefully tomorrow we'll have a post about the ashes. That'll be very good news, and I think to bring some closure to that whole side of the case, because Randy is the true victim of anybody here.
So I have a question, just as kind of generic.
Yes.
For Geet again.
Okay.
How is it that you two have all these conversations with these people? I mean, how are you able to do that?
Well, I think that once the page started up, we didn't reach out to the family and friends, and then people started reaching out to us, and then we were able to start calling and getting a hold of some of these people, and they were willing to talk and willing to chat. I think Greg can talk a little more about people wanting to, do debates and contacting him to, to do things like that. So yeah, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah. I think I can't think of one person that was close to the family or friends at that time that I contacted purposely because I didn't know what they were going through. I didn't want to be a bother to them, but they all contacted me, and so that made me feel free to ask questions. And some of the people I felt were very sincere, but some of them were just like, whoa, okay, there's something really strange here, something very, very strange. And I think with the whole Gray State team, that's kind of how I really felt. It was like, what are these guys doing? Some of the things they would say, we've covered not most of them, but we've covered a lot of those things here. And so, does that answer the question?
I think, Danny August Mason wanted to do a debate and then backed out. And then Sean Wright wanted to do a debate and then backed out. But mainly the Gray State guys are the most active, and Judy Prock now.
Yeah, Judy's kind of cooled off, I guess, right? Or is that, I don't know. I don't hear anything about her anymore from anybody.
Yep.
But I put that out there that I would debate anyone who thinks that they can prove David Crowley is guilty. And so that's, there's been no takers. There's been people that have I think the only one who really stepped up was Judy. That was it. Everybody else either said no, they didn't want to do it, or just, they backed out. So, but the offer's there.
Yeah, correct. Judy did, and then she went for about 3 hours, I think, that one night and spoke. And then as far as Sidra, she contacted me on Facebook and wanted to clear the air on some things. And we got into a communication, a working relationship to get some of this stuff out. And then I proceeded to call her father and left a message or two, one message. And then he proceeded to call me back the next day. So I was able to talk with him for about 35 minutes. But other than that, we haven't actively contacted the family, and in fact have requested that the families not come on to the page and not do things, because a lot of people are talking and making comments and saying things about their loved ones and whatnot. So it's hard because the emotion is still pretty raw. We're able to look at it from an outside view without having to know the circumstances and the family. So it's able to look at it with a clean slate, I guess, versus, Now, Natasha's added some good stuff. She's a very close friend of Sidra and Kamel, and actually met David, and she's been a good resource as well, from speaking to what the family was like and what the family was going through and what kind of things they had to go through all this. But once in a while, then she too will start throwing in there, David was nuts, and David was psycho, and David did this, and David did that, and obviously David killed him. And we try to rein back people from making those comments, because not that we don't want to hear them, but as Greg has said from the very beginning, is we need the evidence. There's no evidence that David did this. And many people from the family, or those who have read the alleged journals, I think come to the same conclusion that this Natasha did. And so she says he did this, he did that, he wrote this, he wrote that, and therefore he did it. It's plain as day. Obviously David did it. And so while that's fair to assume from a character perspective, a person like that could have possibly carried out this crime. But what we're trying to tell folks like that, like the Judy Prochnows of the world, she's another one who said, flat out, once you see the documentary, it'll make sense. You'll know what happened because the documentary is going to tell it all. And the documentary didn't tell us anything.
No, it made more questions.
It didn't tell you anything. So now we know that David's fingerprints aren't on the gun. He used hollow points bullets to kill himself, allegedly. Rear slider was left open, and it's safe to say that a gun used had a silencer or a suppressor on the weapon. So the evidence points to that David Crowley certainly did not do this. That's the evidence. Now, if these alleged journals and David's behavior, and he was becoming controlling and becoming emotionally abusive to Kamel, those are all things that are fair to say, and they could very well be true. That doesn't make him a murderer, though. That's not me being on David's side. That still doesn't place the evidence that David did this. And I think that's what Greg's trying to say when he says we still need the evidence. A journal, showing what a creep David Crowley is, that may well be true reflection of his character. That doesn't put the pistol in his hand, and I think that's the main point. Am I coming across okay there, Greg? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think Natasha starts going off onto some of these tangents, saying what a bad, evil person David was, and I think that she honestly thinks that David did this. And what we're trying to say is the journal could very well be accurate, and he was a poor character, and those two did have a troubled relationship. That could all be very well true. But that's not the same as saying that David pulled the trigger, because the evidence does not support that at all. And I think that's the main difference. And Natasha's very good. We appreciate her for coming forward and talking about the Alam family, but it doesn't behoove any of us to start talking about the character of David and what a bad person he was. That's still not the evidence that we're looking for to place the handgun in his hand.
Yeah, that's all we've been asking for. Right. Go ahead.
I have journals before and written stuff that I go back and read later and go, wow. So I mean, but if you knew me, you would know I wasn't, doing anything crazy or anything. It's just maybe the mood that you were in at that time. You wrote something. So, I mean.
Yeah, that's a good point too. We've only recently discovered that Kamel even had a journal, and the family has admitted that they didn't bring that forth to police. So police are not aware of that. David Crowley's alleged journal didn't come to light until after the case was closed either, I believe, and that's something that they weren't either interested in seeing, or Dan Crowley Sr. didn't push that into their hands. So really, we've got two big smoking guns essentially here with these journals, and none of them are mentioned in the police reports because the detectives never reviewed either one of the journals. They reviewed one in the police report that clearly states that David had an online journal that started in May and ended in September, I think. There was only a few entries, and mainly talked about day-to-day life with his family. It had nothing to do with what would have caused this crime. That's what Captain, I think it was Chief Wrightskull, Apple Valley Chief Wrightskull. Police said that there was nothing in that journal to lead us down the path that would show us why David would have done this. So they were just innocent writings. So I don't know if they were as bad and evil as what they're saying. Maybe they were. We still haven't seen them. I'm still interested that they came out this late in the ball game and there were this detail, and they weren't of interest to the police looking at this case. They've already wrapped it up and moved on, and they're not interested in looking at these journals at all. So very strange.
Do you think there's a chance this could get opened again if we could find some evidence or something, or?
Yes, I do.
Yep. Yeah, I think if a big chunk of evidence comes forward, I think what we're sitting on here is a lot of little pieces that even if if police was looking at this justice page and saying, boy, there's a lot of things here that don't make sense, it still wouldn't be enough to reopen it, I don't believe, unless a private investigator was hired to actually do it. But if there was something major that came out and was exposed, I think it would be their duty to do it. I don't know if they necessarily would ever reopen it, but all we can keep doing is keep digging and exposing this, and sooner or later, hopefully this will come to light, because right now nothing adds up, and it never has.
Yeah, I'm actually hoping we can get Gummert on here, and maybe, try to get him to reopen the case. I really hope we can make that happen, to where he would participate in a conference call like this and answer those questions, answer all of these questions about why they think David Crowley is guilty, what evidence did they find, where's the motive, all that stuff. But these two journals, if the police haven't seen them, I'd like to see them just reopen this case so that they can, add those in there, I guess, and maybe try to back up their own theory, because I haven't seen any proof of what they've stated.
There's things also that, for instance, there's one of the things in I'll call it the alleged journal, and I'll just use this as one example for us to keep our minds open, to get our minds around. Is one of the things was David wrote in his journal that he wanted to try to get Comel to quit her job, and then when she actually did it, he was almost kind of surprised and happy with himself, because he manipulated her to do it, to quit her job. Well, now that's what's in the journal, and the reader reading that can take it however they want to take it. Now, what I'm going to throw out there is here's an example of what I think about when I read something to that effect, if it's even true. Number one, was he trying to get her to quit her job because he was encouraging her to start her own at-home business? She was in the KC Cakes business, making cupcakes. She was in dietary nutritionist. We know at the end she was working from home. She had her own business. She had her own career with clients. Maybe he did want her to quit that job because she could have been more successful working from home, working as an entrepreneur, running her own business. The other thing was, this was the time frame that David was awarded this contract for the movie. He said at the end of the year he was probably going to be a millionaire anyway with this deal being done. They were talking about moving to California. Was this his way to get her to start pulling up some roots, cutting some ties here, so once this movie would get into place, it'd be easier to uproot and move to California? These are the things the person's got to think about when you hear random statements like that saying he tried to get her to quit her job. Well, we need to put that into context. Was he trying to get her to quit her job because he was a controlling freak? Well, David didn't have a job himself. Well, how were they going to make ends meet if he wanted her to quit her job? And if this movie deal, was going to be something that's going to be drawn out down the road over a web series, for instance. So we got to take everything with a grain of salt, and we read these alleged journal entries, and it's all how it's perceived. And I think it doesn't give the clear picture. It's almost like watching that documentary by Eric Nelson. Each video scene is taken out of context, but the viewer watching it thinks, boy, this guy's crazy, and his wife is a nut job too. And what's with the daughter? They're all crazy. And so that's the intent of the movie. But when what came out recently about the David Crowley rehearsing the line from the movie The Transformers in the basement that he recorded himself. He looked like a freak, but if you watch the movie The Transformers, you understood that he was just rehearsing lines, some popular lines from that movie, but it's taken out of context. I think these journal entries may or may not be another thing like that could be taken out of context. But the people who have read them and allegedly seen them said it does not paint him in a good light, and everything else. Well, and that could very well be true. We don't know the true David. We saw and know the David Crowley in the gray state, in the project, in the trailer, the stuff that he filmed, but was he controlling? Was he emotionally abusive? Perhaps he was. That does not make him the killer, because there's no evidence to support that. So that's where we're leading to here with these alleged journals and whatnot. I think that if the police would have read them, they would have said, yeah, the guy's a nut job. He's a conspiracy guy. He appeared to be a prepper from all the stuff he had in the basement. He had a lot of strange posters with weapons, and he looked like a militia type of a dude. So we're probably all better off that he killed his family. That's all they see. They're not going to put that much time into it and close the case and be done with it. They didn't know the impact that he had and how much pull this man had and how bright of a future he had. So it's all in the perspective, but I got to jump off here in a few minutes, but we can get the chat lines going and some other people to jump in as well with their thoughts.
Yeah, is there anybody else who wants to say anything here?
I shared the team. We kind of started out slow. Being like conference champs isn't really like our goal. Our goal as a team is to get better each day and keep working hard.
The Panthers' first conference series of the year is against reigning Valley champion Washington.
What the? Hey, you got
someone not muted?
Yeah, that was Chris Connor. I just muted him.
Oh, no problem.
Okay, Chris, we got you covered. Don't worry. Probably just listening. So, yeah, I mean, unless there's anything else anybody else wants to cover or say, I'm gonna be. I did record a conversation with Natasha last night, and so that's about 99% ready to be uploaded to YouTube. So that'll be up shortly. I want everybody to kind of listen to it before I give any thoughts or anything like that. I'd like to hear what other people think. Once they listen to it, I think we'll have a lot more questions, and then we can kind of go from there. But hopefully we will get Detective Gummert on, and he'll be able to chat with us and let us know why they all think David Crowley is guilty, or if they're willing to reopen the case, or better yet, what it would take for us to reopen this case. So I'll let everybody know if we can make that happen too. I'd also like to talk with Dan Crowley Sr. I think that would also be another good one. Detective Gummert is the only person that I've ever reached out to, but I think I might try to reach out to Dan Crowley Sr. too. That's all I got. Yeah, I would think so.
Wow.
We got some technical audio issues. That's okay. So, yeah, unless anybody else has anything else to say or wants to cover anything else, I think we'll just wrap it up here.
All right, thank you, guys.
Oh, hi, Greg.
Hey.
I've just got
You're still awake?
I am. I'm doing a marathon tonight. It's 3:30.
Oh. Good. I thought you passed out or something over there.
No. I just have to keep going and making more coffee.
Okay. Good.
I've got the last paragraph in the New Yorker, and It's saying that Danny Mason maintains David's Grey State Facebook page, posting videos and remarking every few weeks, usually critical of the government. He and Dan Sr. own the right to the concept, while Dan Jr. is uncertain. Dan Sr. is uncertain what outcome he prefers. Danny Mason still hopes to make Grey State, and that's the last paragraph of the New Yorker's Death of a Dystopian article.
crappy article. Okay.
Well,
I do
I'm
remember that
passing
one.
no comment, but just regarding the ownership,
I got you. Mm-hmm.
I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, that is a really, really good point there. Okay. Yeah, and if you go to that Facebook page, yeah, it is all just anti-government, anti-this, but very, very quick to jump the gun on their friend.
I'm not saying a word.
Okay. All right, then. That's okay.
And there was another thing in the redacted report. Let me just bring it up.
Okay.
Tommy Booth, on his, what would you call it? For want of a better word, his input. There's a little part on that says medical examiner's investigator Greg, what's his name, Spandy, and medical examiner Dr. Jessica Lelinsky arrived on scene and was escorted into the residence by Detective Bone and myself to check out and remove the bodies inside. Dr. Lelinsky did the initial check of the bodies and assisted investigator Spandel, sorry if I've got his name wrong, in the collection of the bodies and body parts. So it does say something about body parts, but it doesn't expand on body parts.
Interesting. I wonder if that means, that's an interesting one, because there would be nothing.
23, page 23.
Page 23. Okay, I'll check that out. Because once they start moving those bodies, that's right. I mean, I don't know, because there's so little left, it would make sense that they might have to have different, all in the same body bag, I guess, but some of the parts might have, detached from other parts. As gruesome as that is.
Yeah. I don't like to think of it too much if I can help it.
Yeah, I know. It's just that's the only thing that would make sense, because I had always thought that both of their heads were actually missing. Like there was no head. That's not true though.
No.
As far as David.
No, there's there are remnants of skull pieces found, according to the autopsy reports.
Right.
And in some of the pictures you can see some things that look skullish.
Looks like a skull, yeah, like a piece of a skull.
And I think there's... Hi,
it's Sophia. How are you?
Hi, Sophia. I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Can I interject a little bit?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay. As you read the autopsy reports, they do say, aside from the body, let me pull one up so I can give you an example of what it says.
Yeah.
They go through, they look at the body, they go through all the different things, and let me, internal evidence, external examination, where is it? There's where they actually say that the evidence was in a brown paper bag. I'm trying to find out where. I know it was on David's, where they had like his mandible, the upper jaw.
Yeah.
And that had been picked up, and it was in a brown paper bag. And I want to see what else. External examination, left hand sealed. That was sealed for evidence. Good Lord, I can't find it now.
It's always the way.
The autopsy. Yes, I have everything. I haven't quite got that done.
So,
but it
So you're looking for which part?
It is for David. It goes on.
It's under internal evidence.
Internal evidence? Okay.
Yeah.
And then they say that aside from the body, they found there's a brown paper bag, and then, but this is David Crowley. Oh, it's in the back. That's why.
Oh, and a bunch of there's bone fragments.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Consistent with flanges. Multiple skull bone fragments. Hello.
Ooh.
Much better.
Someone was whistling.
Multiple skull bone fragments. Articulate. Well, okay. That's interesting. Round defect. A tuft of short brown wavy hair. That's also interesting. The majority of the skull was missing.
Okay, yeah. Examined separately from the body at the time of autopsy was a sealed brown paper bag labeled bone fragments near such and such. Multiple fragments of bone and hair. Maxilla, well-preserved natural teeth showing no metallic restoration present. Then it's talking about different dimensions of skull fragments and things. And then the skull bone fragments is what they picked up.
Those are small, right? Very, very small?
I would guess so. I mean, after the bullet, a hollow point goes through it. But
Could those bone fragments, did they say there were some that says skull bone fragments? Just wondering if all of them are from the skull.
That's what it says.
Okay.
They're just describing skull bone.
It's true.
Dimension skull bone fragment has round defect along one edge. And I'm thinking that probably from the damage of the photo, probably the face, especially since they collected the jaw bones in that same general area. I'm thinking these are bones that might have came from his face.
Okay.
I don't know. That's just a guess. Just from what is stated. We need to have a medical professional look at these autopsy reports.
I think that the part that you're looking for, I think it is on, whose one am I on now? I think it's on Kamel's report about the sealed brown bag that contains bone fragments and multiple something or other bony fragments, 2 mandibles, and there are multiple irregular fragments of bone that range from 1.2 to 8 centimetres. There are larger fragments that appear consistent with skull. Many of the fragments reveal linear appearance consistent with fragmented digit bones. And that's under internal evidence on Kamel's report.
The last bullet point on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they found finger bones, I'm thinking.
Finger bones.
That's consistent. Don't know. I'm not really into the whole medical lingo. I have to look up a lot of stuff.
Because this is under her, so both of her hands were missing. Okay.
Well, they collected them. I'm not sure if they were able to say they were hers.
Gotcha. They might have been so small. Yeah, I mean, how would they even know whose they were or whatever? It's just interesting that they're mentioned here.
And Rainey was in her same general area, and she's missing a whole arm. I mean, it's very possible it could have been Randy's. But
Right.
I don't know. It's just a complete guess on that one. And this is why I'm really wanting to try to get somebody, a medical professional, to look at it and give us their takes on what they read. And
yeah, we should definitely do that. We really need to do that. Maybe get them on a call like this. Have them, go through this stuff and just kind of break it down for everybody. I think that's a good idea. Try to work on that.
And who knows? Maybe in a week or so, we might have more answers.
Fingers
I
crossed.
hope so.
Yes, fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Exactly.
So.
Well, we need something.
We do.
I thought it was
from
very.
What we're reading right now, it just only brings up more answers between the picture, the lab results, the autopsy reports, what is being said. It just doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't.
My opinion, what it adds up to is a staged crime scene.
But why would police do that? Why even take that risk? I don't know. I just don't see a motive for them or anything either in this. Other than
I don't think the police staged it. I'm not saying that at all. Although they were in that house for a very long time without the medical examiner. And they were still taking pictures after he left with the bodies, or she left with the bodies.
That's right.
It leads me to believe that what were they doing all that time? They can't touch the bodies. They can't look for ID. They can't look for keys. They can't look at anything in their pockets. It has to be a medical examiner there before any of the bodies could be touched. And
so it's and the medical examiner didn't get there till when?
Midnight. And the bodies were removed at 1:30 a.m. Yeah.
So by that logic, we should be able to safely say that the photo should be where the bodies were then, right? Or
they can remove the gun, but
not the bodies.
Then,
they shouldn't be touching anything.
No, the way that the photo is on here that we're referring to, that is how the police supposedly found them, because the medical examiner, I guess, is not there yet, unless they took it after he arrived. I don't have a date or a time on this photo that I can see. I'm looking. I can't even see the clock.
Oh, yeah?
Otherwise, I could. No, I can't see the clock in that one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
although the clock says 6 o'clock in one of the blood wall photos, but that doesn't tell me if it's 6 o'clock p.m. or 6 o'clock a.m. I don't know. So they could have.
I would assume it'd be p.m., right?
I don't know what time they left the house when they wrapped up everything.
Gotcha.
Wasn't it late that night, early hours of the next morning?
Well, I know that the bodies were removed at 1:30, and then they took pictures of the laptop, I believe, because one of the photos says Sunday around 1:37, 1:35 a.m. And that was a big discussion because some people thought that the murders might have been dreamed. And then I had just read in the report that the bodies had been removed at that time on a Sunday morning. And so they were still taking photos at that time.
I'm gonna have to go through this again tomorrow because it's like 10 to 4 and that's just gone way over my head.
The information is in the BCA lab report.
Okay, so everybody go check
And
that out.
it should be one of the very first page, because that really got me thinking. I mean, I was just dumbfounded when I read that the coroner arrived approximately midnight. And I'm like, wait a minute, these murders were called in right before 1 p.m. on Saturday. Why would it take almost 12 hours?
Why would it? What's a logical reason for it?
If he was coming from another state?
How far were they? They were in the same county, so they were in Hennepin County, right? Maybe they just weren't notified in time. I don't know.
I don't even remember reading it in the 911 where they said that they would dispatch a coroner. I didn't read anything. Yeah.
But that would give us a good
timeline to do.
Yeah.
Mhm. You're absolutely right,
to try and work out who was in at what time, because you're getting so much information from different agencies, it starts clashing, and then we all just get confused. Was it that time? Was it that time? Maybe it's something we could all work on to try and get a detailed timeline for that whole period and stick that in a file.
Yeah, that would be a good show too, to go over the timeline.
Right, personnel from the Hennepin Medical Examiner's Office entered the scene approximately midnight on 1/18/2015. During their evaluation of the bodies, a hole was observed in the remaining portion of the skull attached to David Timothy Crowley's spine. 2 possible holes were observed in the remaining portion of Camille's skull. A hole was observed behind Rainey's left ear. The additional tattoos were observed, blah, blah, blah. All 3 bodies were removed from the scene approximately 1:30 a.m. on 1/18/2015. Several fragments of bone and tufts of hair were observed in the area rug where the bodies were located. And that is, I cannot tell you what page because I kind of made a board on my wall. And I cut okay. I'm committed to this now.
I can tell. She got a board on your wall.
So, yeah. Anyway, but that is right above the redacted picture on the BCA lab report. That information. I'm guessing probably the 2nd or 3rd page of the BCA lab reports after you get past that list.
Yeah, and those are all found in the file section, and all 3 of them are 7 pages, but I've spent so much time on those pages trying to understand what they're talking about. So it does make sense now, but I've had to get a couple people to kind of tell me how is it possible that a bullet, that the trajectory can be left to right and front to back for the same wound, and it has to do with the skull and how the skull kind of breaks up into pieces or something like that. But I was just kind of baffled by that. So I didn't go and create a theory. I just went and asked a bunch of people.
Of course, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I'm doing too. Is I have to ask people in private, hey, can I bounce something off of you? Let's discuss this portion and bounce ideas back and forth. Because anyway,
you just have to do as much research and get as many opinions, and sometimes it's just the majority wins.
Yes. Or, oh no, that's too ludicrous, and we just toss it.
That's it.
Yeah, and I've come to the point where this is not a murder-suicide unless I see an actual suicide note or evidence. Show me some hardcore evidence. Then I'm happy to say, okay, I was wrong. But
Right.
these results are not adding up at all. And the more I look at it, the more I see staged. But I don't think any of the lab tests were redacted. Why wouldn't they test the supposed suicide note? The only thing that they really did was a handwriting to see if there was any hidden messages from the notepad, like a piece of paper torn off or whatever, and they could not make out anything significant. It was just notes that David typically took, jotting down just different words and stuff. So they weren't even able to see if there was any smoking gun. Sorry, that's a horrible pun. But yeah, even the bullet in the attic doesn't have tissue, doesn't have blood. It can't be the suicide bullet. So where's the bullet that David had? They didn't test the hole in the ceiling. There's no DNA results for that.
No, but that would have been one month later, though, right? So 1 month. So that would have been almost two months. So how long would the blood, DNA or whatever? How long would that stay on that bullet? And because I think the same thing happened with the bullet in the basement. They didn't find any blood on that bullet either, as far as I know. Could be wrong on that, but. This is why I keep books of notes, so I can write this stuff down and go back to it. For that bullet?
Yeah, I need to go to all the evidence taken from the house to see what number it corresponds with. Living room floor. Huh.
Yeah, so there's a defect found in the basement, I think it was.
That's what I'm going to try to see, and then I can correspond to see if there was any blood or tissue DNA on it.
Okay.
I see living room. Okay, south basement wall. That's item 45. No DNA profile was obtained. That's 45-1.
And that's for the basement or the
bullet?
For the basement bullet. Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
And the bullet from the rug.
Yeah, the one found on the 19th.
Yes, that's item 53-1. 2 or more individuals. Major DNA was Rainey.
Okay. Very interesting.
David and Kamel are excluded from being contributors of the mixture. Who else were the other individuals in mixture?
Mixture.
And it is something that we need to realize is these DNA results, they weren't finished until the end of June that year. So the police had gone out, made their statements and everything. And then the DNA results come back.
Wow. Interesting.
What? The results, the date on it is June 30th, 2015.
Okay. I'm just writing that down. You're gonna have to take a picture of this wall so we can see it one day.
I will, but it's kind of crooked,
Oh, good.
But yeah, I'm not done. I mean, I have more information I need to put up there, the autopsy reports, and then I have the lies that have been told, or excuse me, disinformation that has been told.
Mm-hmm.
And then doing backgrounds on all the key players. So,
Seem to be a lot of them.
oh yeah.
Sylvia just said in the chat room that the Gray State page just posted something. I think I've been kicked out of there. Oh no, maybe that was the YouTube. I think it was both, maybe. I don't know what they're yapping about.
Shit.
Hey, we got somebody else here? Who else is with us? I can hear you. I know you're there.
Greg, I sent you the picture of the wall.
Oh, okay.
For now.
Why do I do this to myself? I should just
Well, it's just a starter. I just put it up last night.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It kind of looks like what David had out. You better be careful.
Hey.
This looks good, actually. Wow. Okay. Have you had any comments on it? Have you shown it to anybody?
It's in the corner.
Okay.
It's in the corner of my room. I'm gonna have to take it down anytime maintenance comes in.
Oh, I got you. I think that list is gonna. I think that wall's gonna get bigger. That list on the wall, it's gonna get bigger.
Oh yeah.
In time.
Next week I plan on printing out all the photos.
Oh,
so
good.
It's gonna get way bigger. But yeah, I'm committed to this now.
Yeah. Well, somebody's got to be. I mean, it shouldn't take a bunch of outsiders like us to really figure out what's going on here. But apparently, there's just answers. There's questions that we have people either can't answer, won't answer, or just enjoy playing games. So, whatever. We're going to figure out what's going on here.
I hope so, because the family deserves answers, and their family deserves answers.
Yeah, and I think over time they're going to have more questions.
Yeah, I think so too. And hopefully we can finally get this case reopened once we have enough.
Yep. I really think we're going to find something. Something's going to come out. Something's going to happen. So, something positive. I'm keeping hope.
And hopefully we'll have answers in a week or so. More answers. Probably
more answers are good.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes. You get some answers and 20 more questions. But
sounds good. Okay, well, unless anybody else has anything to add.
I think we've covered. I say we, you and Dan and Sophia and everyone else have covered quite a lot. Certainly, food for thought.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure we'll be coming up with more inconsistencies and contradictions, and like you say, when people have heard your latest upload, that will bring a whole load more to the table, no doubt.
I sure hope so. All right, everyone. Still want to come back and do this again next month, maybe, and we'll do another poll and try to figure out whatever topic people want to talk about, and we'll go from there. Maybe we'll be able to get Mr. Gummert on next month. We'll see. Definitely try.
We shall. Definitely. Sounds good.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you all for joining us. And Luis, you made it. I can't believe you stayed the whole time. That's cool.
I know. The birds are singing now, Greg.
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning. And now I've had that much coffee, I probably won't sleep.
I think you might as well just stay up.
I might as well. Definitely. Well, it was good to talk, and I will speak to you all on the page in the group, no doubt.
Sounds great.
Good night, everyone.
All right, everyone. Good night.
Night. Bye.
Bye now.